All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Hope City Church. My name is Peter. Glad you guys are here today. We are in the midst of our summer series called Stuff They Didn't Teach You in Sunday School. How many of you got 3 out of 5 of those questions right? You can be honest. It's okay. Okay, did anybody get 4 out of 5 right? Anybody? Okay, you needed to pay more attention in Sunday school. Anybody 5 out of 5? All right. You were like the Sunday school nerds if you got that totally right. But, we're in the midst of this series. We're having a lot of fun this summer, doing some different things, kind of mixing it up, because we wanted to, like Tiffany said, my wife Tiffany said, that we think church should be fun. In fact, I think people have been coming to church far too long and just enduring church rather than actually enjoying church. So my goal today is to help us enjoy spending some time at church today. But how many of you remember, like, old school church? And what I mean by old school church is, like, you got in your pew, your designated pew, right? You guys remember these pews? They had the end caps, which basically made it impossible for you to try and sneak out. Like, if you need to go to the bathroom, you're done. You were just done. Like, you were in the center of that pew for the rest of your day. What does pew even really mean? I'm not really sure about that. Why didn't they just call them benches? So I've served at a bunch of different churches throughout my years, and the first church that I was a youth pastor at, I found somewhere in the building. I still have it, so I don't know if that's stealing or not, but there's a sign, this little brass plaque that says reserved pew, which I thought, this is amazing. Like, who reserves a pew in church? Like, who reserves a chair or a bench? Like, I don't understand, but that's apparently a thing that they did. But this was old school church. I didn't notice very many bonnets today, so if we could up our bonnet game, that would be awesome here at Hope City. But then one of the things that they did in old school church was this guy. This is called a flannel graph, and a flannel graph was basically like prehistoric PowerPoint. Okay, so this is, we would put different things on here, and today, believe it or not, we're going to bring it back. We're going to go. Everything's retro is coming back around. Super cool. So just let's think of this as really cool today. But that's where we're going to head today. But somehow, this is my heartbeat. I think that we've done an incredible job in this era. This era of church did an incredible job of getting the Bible into us. Like, where it was just, they got the Bible in our heads and we knew the stories and all this kind of stuff. But I'm wondering if for one reason or another, if we've done just a really good job of knowing about God, but not really knowing God. And so one of my desires in this series is for us to take a look at some of those Sunday school stories, some of those, famous stories that you probably could stand here and tell the entire thing and begin to unpack it and see what God was doing behind the scenes. Because I'm convinced the worst thing that we can do is to know a lot about God, but to miss out on what God is doing in the world around us. So recently I had this moment, a very similar moment to that, actually, where it was February, and you guys, all the men in the room know what February is. That's Valentine's Day. Like, it is breathing down your neck. By the time February 1st hits, you know that you're already late. Like, you've already missed the boat. You better find that perfect gift or whatever it may be. And so it was February this year, and I was like, I'm going to be ahead of the game, because I'm not going to do a February of 2016 in 2017. We're going to have a repeat of that. Like, not going to happen. So I said to Tiffany, what are some things that you would like? And, we had been dating for 16 years. This is us. That didn't mean we started dating when we were 2. It just means, men, that you need to keep dating your wife once you're married. Like, okay? Like, all the women in the room, you guys can cheer on and amen and all that business. And it's all good, right? Pat your husband on the back. Keep dating me. So I was 16 years since we started dating, and I was like, you know what? This is going to be the year where I'm gonna think about it. I'm going to spend some time, and I'm going to get her a present. So I got her some flowers. But here's what I know about my wife, Tiffany. Tiffany does not like cut flowers. Because cut flowers, and some of you women are shaking your head, what happens? They die. Like, you buy them, they look great for a little bit. They're really expensive, too. Like, I don't know if you've checked that out. But they're, like, expensive. And so, unless you go to Publix. But they're still expensive. And so I was like, I'm not getting cut flowers. I'm going to go and I'm going to get her some flowers. We have these 2 planters out front. And so I bought a whole bunch of stuff to put in those pots. Beautiful. Did it ahead of time. And then I said, I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to get her a plant, to bring inside That way, like every day she wakes up, looks at it, sees the beauty of this plant, and is reminded of how beautiful I think she is, right? And so I did this. I went and I found a plant that I think is beautiful. I got one of those orchids, you know, the kind that has all the leaves on the bottom and then 2 stalks that stick up, and then there's all these really delicate and ornate flowers at the top. And so I set it all up. I wrote a card ahead of time. Like I said, I was winning. This was a good thing. I went to bed that night thinking, I'm a hero. Like, I have achieved hero status in this relationship. And she's like, you know, super gracious, super kind. And about a month later, I hear this like, hey, we need to talk. And I was like, we need to talk? Like, we're not dating anymore. We can't have that conversation. Like, we're married. We don't have those we need to talk conversations, right? And so she's like, no, seriously, like, I need to tell you something. I was like, all right. So we sat down, and she goes, I hate orchids. Like, I hate orchids. Like, when is it going to die? Like, kid you not, she's like, when is that thing gonna die? And so I was like, all right, whoa, I didn't know that. I said, and then I started to explain to her, I got you a purple orchid because I know you love purple. I got the vase was green. I know that you love green, and the combo is amazing, right? She goes, no, you love that plant. That's your flower that you love. I don't love that thing. I was like, oh. And in a moment, I realized that I have known everything about my wife. Like, I nailed it I was perfect. She doesn't like cut flowers. She likes purple, likes green, all that stuff. But yet I missed her heart because I didn't speak in a way. I didn't give her something that spoke to her heart. It was about me, and she, you know, graciously shared that with her ladies group. But anyway, I'm afraid. This is what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of that some of us in this room, we can go through life knowing everything about someone or something, their favorite foods, favorite colors, their love of real flowers, but if we don't spend time asking the right questions, we will miss out on knowing that person's heart. And I wonder if we've treated God in much the same way, where we could answer questions on some cheesy little quiz like that, and we could get them all right, but still miss out on what God's heart says about the world around us, or what his heart beats for the city of Sarasota, or what it beats for your marriage or your family. And today, I think in the midst of all of our knowing, somehow we may have just experienced missing out on God's heart behind all of this. And so one of the stories that could easily get left on this flannel graph board from the old school Sunday school days is the story of Daniel and the lion's den. So today, we're going to go back in the pages. We're going to turn to Daniel chapter 6, which is on page 618 in the Bibles around you. That's in the Old Testament, and I would love for you to join me there because Daniel and the Lion's Den is one of those epic tales. Like, it makes for great cartoons. It makes for great stop motion. Like, it makes for all kinds of great stuff. It makes for great flannel graph. It is an incredible story. However, there's something incredible about this story that I think we're going to reveal today, that it's actually a story far more than just about lions who didn't get to eat. So let's jump in and find out more about Daniel and the Lion's Den. But of course, like I said, we're going to go back to the flannel graph board. See, this story takes place where the nation of Judah, which is God's people, has actually been captured. See, this king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, he comes in, and what he does, he comes in on the scene, and he absolutely annihilates Judah. He takes Judah, and he captures that group of people. And in capturing that group of people, then he says, hey, guess what? All of you that I've captured, just the smartest and the brightest, you guys are going to come into my court, and you're going to serve me. And so we've got King Nebuchadnezzar who brings these guys in, and they serve in the king's court. But now King Nebuchadnezzar, he had a son whose name was Belshazzar. And Belshazzar, he had a strange little twist in his kingdom reign. And lastly, King Darius comes on the scene. And so our boy Daniel actually served underneath of 3 different kings. This was King Nebuchadnezzar. Then there's King Belshazzar. And then there's King Darius. And so King Darius is on the throne today. That's the beauty of flannel graph. You can do that. And so Daniel was a young man who was captured when King Nebuchadnezzar went to war with Israel. Look in Daniel chapter 1, in this verse. It says this: "In the 3rd year in the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it." He went all like William Wallace Braveheart on it, took it over, and the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. It goes on, he says, "These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia." So he brought what was rightfully Judah's, which was rightfully God's, and brought it into King Nebuchadnezzar's court. Now Daniel, he would be placed into the service of these 3 kings. This guy right here, we're going to let that be Daniel. He was placed into the service of those 3 kings, and we mentioned this detail last week, which I think is worth coming back to today. It's this, that God uses uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Don't forget who Daniel is. Like by the end of today, don't forget where Daniel started. Daniel started out as a young man, as a youth who was captured by a king who came and raided his village. And then he was forced into labor in the king's court. Not a very sexy way to begin life. And that's where Daniel is. That's where his story starts. But see, his story doesn't stop there. God did some extraordinary things through this ordinary young man, because Daniel, he rose through the ranks. In fact, in the first 5 chapters of Daniel, you see how God used him over and over again and protected Daniel throughout this captivity. But here in chapter 6, we find Daniel being appointed to one of 3 positions as an administrator over the entire city. Over this entire nation, Daniel rises to the ranks with 2 other gentlemen, and they begin to lead this nation. But look at what happens in Daniel 6, verse 3 through 4. It says this: "Now Daniel so distinguished himself among these administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And at this, these administrators, these satraps, they tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so." See, we know what this is, right? Like, we know what's happening in the story. These guys see what's happening to this guy, and they're like, why isn't that happening to me? They get insanely jealous that the king's favor is landing on Daniel and not on them. And they're like, man, I wish that would happen to me. And so they decided to do something about it. They're like, let's find something on Daniel. Let's find what we can hold over his head. Let's see what we can throw back in his face, what kind of smear campaign we can come up with. And yet they couldn't find anything. Look at verse 4 and 5. It says they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We'll never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the laws of his God." See, Daniel, this government official, was trustworthy. He wasn't laundering money. He wasn't taking bribes. He was doing what was asked of him. He was being in the right place at the right time, and God was honoring that. So instead of finding something, these men had to then create something. See, look how they did this. One day, they came into the king's court, a whole bunch of them this time. A whole bunch of these guys. They show up to King Darius, and they're like this. It says this: "So these administrators and satraps, they went as a group to the king, and they said this: 'May King Darius live forever.'" Just kind of hit pause there. This whole group, a whole group of people come into your living room, and they're like, "Dude, I hope you live forever." And you're like, "Yes, I do." And they're like, "I hope that you become the most powerful person." "Yes, me too." And then, so all of a sudden, King Darius starts to listen to these guys a bit. So it goes on and says this: "The royal administrators, the prefects, the satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed." Anybody who's anybody, we've all agreed that you, king, should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, they should be thrown in the lion's den. Now, how does that sound if you're king? You're like, that's not half bad. I kind of see what you're coming at. Yeah, all right. And then this kind of mob mentality builds. And so here's what happens. They go on and they say this, like, you know what, Daniel, it goes in and says, Daniel learned this decree, or excuse me, jumping ahead. It says, "Your Majesty, issue the decree, put it in writing so that it cannot be altered. in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Basically, these guys are saying, hey, I'm just going to remind you that once this happens, there's nothing you can do about it, because they already knew in their head what was going to happen. So King Darius put the decree into writing. He made it so. Their efforts worked. They appealed to his vanity, and it became law. So for 30 days, no one could pray to anyone other than the king. And guys, we need to pause here, because this is the part of Daniel's story that we begin asking ourselves the question of, like, what is that one man going to do? Like, what decisions does he make? Because this is the part of the story where we call this the rising action. The story where it looks like, our hero is going to get, he's going to be defeated. It's not going to work out well. And it begs the question of, what does Daniel do next? But to bring this live, like kind of bring it into our world today, what happens when you and I are presented with a decision that you need to make? Like, for example, let's just say that at work, everybody else starts clocking in early, and then they take turns of the guy that's going to be there early to clock everybody in. And they're like, hey, do you want me to clock you in early? You can get an extra 30 minutes. And then on the end of the day, somebody stays a little bit later and clocks everybody out. And the question is, like, are you going to be a part of that? Like, or maybe that's not really kind of relevant to your world. What about this? You get paid cash from some jobs, and you set that cash aside. You start spending that cash and living off that cash. But then come the end of the year when it's tax season, and Uncle Sam comes and says, hey, how much money did you make this year? You have a question that you need to answer. You're like, well, what do you write? Like, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like, it's not that big a deal. Or what if we make this actually real, and it's within the context of your relationships with your spouse? And you say, well, it didn't really hurt because I'm just looking. Like, I'm not actually touching. Like, nothing's happening. I'm just looking, right? Well, what kind of decisions do you make in those moments of opportunity? Reveals so much about what's going on behind the scenes. And so look back at the story of Daniel and what he did in this moment when he was faced with a decision. It says, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went to his home upstairs, to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God. And look here, what does this say? Just as he had done before. Just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and they found Daniel praying, asking God for help. See, Daniel does exactly what Daniel had did every day beforehand. Daniel goes back home. He goes up to the room, and he gets down on his knees, and he prays, just like every day before. But this day, there was these 3 guys peeking their head through the window. Again, flannel graph, it's beautiful. Peeking their head through the window, seeing Daniel, and they're witnessing what Daniel's decided to do. And because we know the story, because we've seen it before, because Sunday school did a great job of telling us this, these 3 guys go back to King Darius and they say, hey, King, we found this guy who's praying to somebody other than you. Who's that? Daniel. Ugh. Hey, King, I want to remind you that according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, you cannot do anything about this. You have to throw him in the lion's den. King Darius is actually somewhat of a stand-up guy if you look at the whole story, that he really didn't want to throw Daniel in the lion's den. But Daniel, because of this, because of the law, because King Darius had to enforce the law, traded that window for another window. Daniel is thrown into the lion's den where he would be awaiting his fate. Now, see, I want us to just think about something for a second, because this is the moment in time when it looks like it's all over for Daniel, right? There's lions in here, and they're just like kind of surrounding Daniel. I imagine they're sort of swarming him, and he's thrown in there. And I don't know about you, but I don't live very far from big cat habitat. How many of you guys, you've been to big cat habitat? I saw somebody was there recently, like just yesterday. And so early in the morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, if I go out on the back porch, I can hear the lions. And I'm like 1.5 miles away from these guys. I can hear them. I don't know if it's they're waking up. Like, it sounds a little bit like Noah when he's waking up. Like, it's strange. Or maybe they're being fed, but it's loud. And it's 1.5 miles. And I'm kind of like, so what would I do if, and I start running all these scenarios, if like one got loose, what would I do? Now think about Daniel who's in there with them. In fact, I want this to be so real for us because this is the decision that Daniel faced. See, this is what a lion sounds like up close and personal. Listen to this. Some of you just jumped out of your seat right now, just listening to it. Now try being next to that, right? Like it would be an impossible thought. Can you imagine having to spend the night in a pit with lions overnight? But that's exactly what Daniel had to do. Listen to what King Darius said. King Darius said to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." And Daniel entered into the dark night. But see, here's where Sunday school has done us a disservice. And if you missed out on Sunday school, hey, listen, I'm glad that you're here today. And if you never set foot in a church before, I'm glad that today is the day because I think that there's some incredible things that you and I can learn from a story like this that help apply to our world even today. See, Sunday school did us a disservice here because nowhere in Scripture nowhere in the Bible do we ever see that the Bible says that Daniel was afraid. Nowhere. Nowhere. And yet these are the words that we're taught. These are the crafts that we make when we tell the story of Daniel in the lion's den. You know, you take one of those Dixie paper plates and you kind of cut it and cut the mouth out and put some tissue paper on it to make it look like a lion. And then inside of the mouth, the scariest place on the lion, by the way, they say, hey, whenever I'm afraid, I'll trust in you. In God I have put my trust, I will not fear. Psalm 56:3. And so that's the verse that we attribute to the story of Daniel in the lion's den. Well, guess what? That's not correct. See, Psalm 56:3 doesn't belong to Daniel. In fact, Psalm 56:3 was written by a guy by the name of David, not Daniel. David was a dude that was afraid. David was a guy that was on the run. Daniel was a man that stood in the face of fear, and he was unafraid. Why? Daniel was not afraid because he was content to be where he was because, you know what? The threat of where he was wouldn't change who he was. And that's our first point this morning. That you and I, we should write this down, that never change who you are based upon where you are. See, sometimes out of convenience, we change the way that we act, we change the things that we say, we change our behavior, we might change the way we dress, or quite possibly even the way that we speak, depending upon the people that we're around. Last fall, my family and I, we traveled from Florida to go to Texas, that's where my family lives. My mom, my two sisters live out there, and then my one sister lives up in Indiana, and so we all met there for Thanksgiving. Now, I grew up in a pastor's home. I grew up in a home that Tiffany likes to make fun of me. We grew up in the same era, or the same time, but she grew up in a different era than me. I wore little bow ties, and my shirts were buttoned all the way up, and I tucked them in, pleated pants, the whole 9 yards, right? Patent leather shoes, I think. Is that a thing? I'm not sure. That's what I was told. So I grew up in a different world. And so when I was a teenager, when I was in junior high and stuff, like my family, like I shopped at at Gap and Eddie Bauer, but really like the sale racks of all these places. And what I'm driving at is that I used to dress very differently. And my family remembers me from that kind of time frame. And in fact, my one aunt still kind of grieves the fact that I shave my head and I don't let my hair grow in and all this stuff. It's like, okay, get over it. And so there's a point here. So I'm driving to Texas, and on my way to Texas, or actually packing for it, I had this thought in my head. I was like, what clothes am I going to bring? What am I going to wear when I'm with my family? Because I don't personally, I've changed in my fashion. It's just the best way to put it. So when we were planting a church, Tiffany knew what was going on in the back of my head. She knew some of the fears that I had and all this kind of stuff, and the fears that I currently still have. And she bought this necklace that I have on right now. And it's a key. It's from a company called The Giving Keys, and there's a word stamped on it. And the word stamped on this key is the word courage. And I wear this key from time to time because I know there are days when I wake up, I know that this day is going to require that I'm filled with courage. That I will walk through some very uncomfortable situations, or I will have to deal with things that I never thought I'd have to deal with, or whatever it may be. And so she gave this to me, and I've worn this key off and on from time to time throughout the last year. This is very much out of my family's comfort zone. Like what? It's kind of like, what are you doing? What's that necklace? And so I had this moment in my closet when I was packing my suitcase, and I went, am I going to bring that? Should I pack that necklace? Followed by, should I pack those joggers? And in my head I was like, yeah, I have to, because this is who I am. And I'll tell you, I wish that I could say it was easy and it wasn't like, a big deal and that family's family, but man, when I showed up that first day, I was so tempted to just tuck this inside and see if I could just hide it. And so it was like me being half me, but also kind of hiding a little bit of me. And see, here's the reality. This is nothing. This is the easiest thing. If this is the hardest thing that I ever have to do going through life, is have somebody think that I'm weird because I wear a necklace that's in the shape of the key with a word on it, big deal. But some of us are in a position where the people around us, they kind of look at us and they wonder, what's up with you? Because you do things that are differently. Or some of you are like, you know what, there's situations that are tough to navigate because the people that you're around don't share the same convictions as you. They might think that you're strange or weird or whatever it may be. And there's a question that you have to ask yourself is, what am I going to do when everybody else thinks that what I'm doing is wrong? What do we do, right? And I honestly think that as people that follow Jesus, we're going to be faced with that decision more and more. See, I wonder if you've got friends who just don't share your convictions, and when you're around them, you're tempted to act more like them. See, Daniel went into the lion's den. Why? Because he was refusing to be just like everybody else. Daniel went to the lion's den because he didn't change who he was based upon where he was. Daniel went to the lion's den, yes, but he didn't go there alone. Let's look back at the story. At first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried down to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. Remember, King Darius and Daniel, he wanted to put Daniel in charge of his entire kingdom. And he said, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions? Has your God been able to rescue you? This is a conversation, a question that people ask throughout all of history. Has your God been able to do? Is God strong enough? Is God capable enough? And what does Daniel say? Daniel answers back, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty. See, don't miss out on the fact that Darius says, has your God been able to save you? And Daniel says, yes, because there was an angel. God sent an angel to shut the mouth of the lions, to prevent them from eating, to prevent them from killing me. See, Daniel calls back, and he says, God shut the mouth of the lions. The God who supernaturally created these lions displayed power over the natural order by shutting their mouths. I love this painting. Check this out, by British painter Britton Rivera. He captures what Scripture reveals about the story of Daniel. See, even to the fiercest beast, Daniel's just kind of standing there casually. I love that center lion, that big, strong, proud lion who almost, his head may be up, but his whole body is kind of cocked back in a position of submission. And this one right over here, whose eyes are almost like downtrodden, like, I thought we were finally going to get to eat, right? Like, what is happening? This guy's just hangry in the back corner. He's just like, I want to eat you. But this sense of like utter peace in the midst of chaos. This is the story of Daniel. See, don't miss the question that was asked. Was God strong enough to save you? And the question really they're asking is, which God is strongest? The God of King Darius or the God of Daniel? And Daniel responds back and he says, it is my God, my God. See, this scene breaks with logic. It breaks with what we know to be true. It goes against our gut feeling, but it reveals to us the power that Daniel's God had to save him. In verse 23, it goes on and says, the king was overjoyed, and he gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted up from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. See, no wound was found on Daniel for one reason, because he had trusted God. But here's the question. When did Daniel start trusting God? Was it the moment that he was lowered into the lion's den? Was it the moment that he started to see these fearful images? Was it the moment that the lion first roared? When was it? If you look back at the story of Daniel, you'll see that Daniel trusted God before he even had to. Daniel trusted God with his life when his life was on the line. And Daniel, he had faith in God, but faith and trust are two very different reactions. See, faith is belief-oriented. Faith is saying, I believe that God is there. I believe that God's going to take care of me. And trust says, well, if you believe that, then go and act that out. Live that out. Daniel trusted God. He had faith in God for sure, but he was trusting that no matter what, he was going to walk in what he knew to be true. And see, we use this word integrity around this. But what does integrity mean? Integrity means being true to who you are even when nobody else is looking. It's who you are in the dark, when nobody else sees. That's your integrity. See, even when the situation was unfavorable, David remained who he was. Daniel remained who he was. Daniel reminds us of this, that we need to choose to trust God before all you can do is trust God. See, in the pit of a lion, in the lion's den, you and I, we would be in there going, oh, please, God, please, please, please. We would actually be more like this Daniel on our knees praying, like, God, if only you just get me out of this, I'll do whatever it takes. God, we throw this lob, this Hail Mary. It's like, God, do this, and I will do whatever it may be. But that is not when Daniel trusted God. Daniel chose to trust God even before he was in a position where he had to trust God. You guys, we've been in situations like this. You've been in a situation where, last minute, God will do anything to get me out of it. Maybe it's finances. Like your finances came down so tight that there was nothing else you could do but to trust God that somehow the bills were going to get paid. What if we trusted God ahead of time with your finances? What if we trusted God and we lived according to his standard? What if, maybe this was a time in your job where your job's not going too well, your boss starts talking about performance evaluations and all this kind of thing, and you have to trust God in that moment. What if it's trusting God with your career the way that Daniel did, even before you have to trust God? Choose to trust God before all you can do is trust God. See, Sunday school made Daniel in the lion's den about how lions didn't eat a man, and how a man trusted God when he was in fear, but they're missing the heart behind the story. See, Daniel trusted God before he was in a position to fear, and that's why he could stood in the face of fear, because of his trust. And because of his trust, the entire nation was pointed back to God. Briefly look at this with me. It says, King Darius wrote to all the nations of all peoples of every language in all the earth. Darius, the king, writes this and says, may you prosper greatly. And I issue a decree in that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth, and he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. God worked through an ordinary man to do an extraordinary thing, to show the world around him that God of Daniel is more powerful than anything you have to fear. And my question is this morning, where do you have to trust God? Because this is very real. This is very much a part of our life. You might be in some other kind of lion's den that these are just symbolic. This actually looks a lot more like the budget. This looks like your spouse. You're worried about all of these different things. There may be something that has you trapped right here, and the question I have for you is, will you trust God with that? See, when we're living in a place of trust, God's supernatural power is evidence of that. And honestly, I'm afraid that too few of us end up in lions' dens because of our convictions. That actually we need to stand firm to the things that we believe in. We need to stand firm in our relationships. We need to trust God in our marriages where it's like, you know what? When it gets hard, that's when I actually lean in. That's when I begin to water the grass so it looks just as green as everywhere else. That's when I start to kind of pony up in the job place and I start to, buckle down and I ask God, I trust God in each one of these environments. See, this morning, I would love nothing more than for us to just pause in our service. See, in a few minutes, I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on all that God has done for us. The same power that saved Daniel from the lion's den, that same power, he's rescued and saved us. And this morning, we're going to take communion together in just a few seconds. See, just like Daniel, how he was shut in the lion's den overnight, Jesus' lifeless body after he was hung on a Roman cross and left to die, he was placed in a tomb. It was sealed with a stone. And for 3 days, his lifeless body laid there. With the world watching, wondering, is this it? Was this all just kind of like false hope? Until the third day. Until that moment when Jesus' body came back to life and he did the unthinkable. He stepped out of that tomb, that place that was holding him down, so that you and I could be made right with God, so we can have a relationship with God. See, guys, faith is all about relationship. Society has made it about religion. But my question is this morning is, what if we've missed out on the heart of God because we've just known a lot about God? But God desperately wants us to trust him. We say we place our faith in him, but will we live that faith out in acts of trust? See, I want to invite you to come to the communion table to remember all that Christ did for you. An opportunity to refocus our hearts and our minds on Christ, but also our trust. And there's 2 stations down here on my left and my right, and I'd love for you to grab one of those wafers and dip it into the juice and remember that Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, said to his friends, "This is my body which has been broken for you. And this is my blood which has been poured out for you. For you, so that you and I would have real life and have life to the fullest as Christ calls it." And so today, I'm inviting you in the next few moments to have a time of reflection, to just do some self-evaluation of where is your trust, where is your faith? Do you need to put your trust back in God? That in spite of these challenges, in spite of the differences, in spite of the frustrations, that you'll stick with it and not give up.